Yes, guys, we have a big episode today. I am kicking in with my first matrix of the 2025 draft. I did a couple of these last year, and they're pretty popular for you guys. And I think they are a good way of honing in on one particular position, at least, and having a look at these guys to see how they sort of project at the next level across a vast array of different sort of skills. Now, what I've decided to do here with this is to remove all of the academy and father son type players. So I've just gone with open pool mids. I've selected 8 of the players that I think are probably the best midfielders at the next level for us to take a look at. And we're going to go across like a bunch of different skills. I've got 12 in total across kind of different attributes and stuff like that. But what I kind of want to focus on here is not necessarily purely trying to rank these players like one, two, three using this. I want to sort of show you different types of midfielders at the top level and what these guys probably project at. And then juxtapose kind of what they're doing currently versus what we think they can do in the future based on their different attributes. So it's going to be a bit of a journey. Strap in, grab yourself a coffee, and we'll get stuck into it now. So a quick bit of housekeeping here. I'll just show you the 4 different types of sort of, archetypes or roles, positions, and things like that are sort of currently being occupied at the top level. So we're going to go over and sort of put these guys into categories of what we think they're going to do at the top level. First possession midfielders, the stoppage type midfielders. In this draft crop, I think we have Oliver Greaves, we have Dyson Sharp. You'd throw Dan Annabelle in. He, of course, isn't in the open market, so we're going to leave him out. But Greaves and Sharp are probably the 2 really prototypical types of this first possession type midfielder, and I think they are going to go on to do that at AFL level. It's a fairly obvious one there. It's that sort of Tom Green. You've got smaller bodied players as well that do that role. Caleb Sarong, Matty Rao, but I guess the famous ones, Nat Fife's probably another one that sort of does that currently to some extent. And then you've got Patrick Cripps is probably one of the best that's ever sort of done that first possession role. So that's the sort of player that we're looking at there. I think there's a point to make there that the game is probably transitioning away from those guys a little bit, and we probably have those more sort of outside types. At the end of the day, you've got to be able to win first possession as well, even if you are a more sort of transition type midfielder. But definitely the game is going towards more of those transition types as opposed to these first possession types. Now, I think built into all of that, I think there's a safety in these first possession types because they tend to be closer to their final form, what they're doing currently, because of their bigger body, their more physicality, and their sort of craft around the stoppage lends themselves to being kind of more AFL ready straight away. But at the same time, I think down the track, if you recruit too many of these guys, you could sort of end up with a overcapitalization in a certain area. So I think that's something to consider. So there's a safety net there of the closer to final form, but then you don't want to overcompensate. So interesting there. The other one we've got is transition type midfielders. Now these guys definitely vary in their sort of height and athletic types and those sorts of things. But the players from the 2025 crop that I have, Willem Dersma, Jevon Philippou, Sam Grill, and Jacob Farrow. Now you could throw your Zeke Eulens and your Dylan Pattersons into this group as well as those guys that sort of have pace on the outside. They can bring the ball from inside to out, but probably as it currently stands, they're not as close to that sort of contested possession, ball in dispute type player, and they're more getting the ball on the outside and carrying the ball for you. So that this probably has become the primary role amongst the midfield group where you carry more of these types of players, and then the quality just depends and varies a little bit. The third one that I've got is the sort of center forward type midfielder. And again, you look at players that currently play that role. It's probably, Bailey Humphries, an up and coming one, Jason Horne-Francis, but Dustin Martin probably popularized this position. Christian Petrarca is another one as well. That player that can go in, win center clearances, but then also push forward, take marks, win forward 50 contests as well. And I've got 2 players listed for this. I think the archetypically most dominant one in this draft is probably Sam Cumming from South Australia. And the other one is Noah Hibbins-Hargraves, who I've put in there. Now, he's a different type. He's not so much that powerful type, but he's a bit of a utility and he's a little bit hard to pin down to one position. A player I've compared him to is like a Harry Sheezel, and Harry Sheezel is sort of playing that forward mid role in a different sense to some that have played it in the past, but they are sort of the archetypical positions. I think you could probably throw Jevon Philippou into the powerful sort of forward of center type midfielder as well. I think he's going to occupy quite a few different positions, and he's a very versatile type as well. Probably the only other role to consider there is that sort of defensive type midfielder, someone like a Josh Dunkley, James Rowbottom, Willem Drew, that type of player. But when you're fishing in the top end of the draft, you're probably not necessarily looking for that type of player. that probably comes from one of those other roles, like a transition mid or a first possession mid that's potentially failed in that role, and then you use them as more of a defensive type player. So that is another one, but probably not one that we're going to focus on too much here. So I think that the biggest thing there between those two positions, or there's three there really, but transition players versus the first possession players, it's probably around that kind of developmental aspect to it. I think the first possession guys are closer to final form, whereas a lot of the transition guys probably have a little bit more development to go into them. So there's more of a risk attached to that. But also, as I said, you're probably using more of those transition guys. And if they could, someone like a Willem Dersma or a Jevon Philippou, they probably have more options and versatility to be able to go into different positions as well. So that's something that you have to consider overall in, your list build and those sorts of things as well. So we'll kick in here. I'll show you the categories. So I've kind of broken it down into three different aspects of, what goes into an athlete really, the IQ and the mental. So I've got four different distinctions in there: decision making, competitiveness, leadership, and craft, which is kind of depending on your position. I've sort of got stoppage and transition craft there. I've got the technical ability, just kicking, handballing, just your hands in general, cleanliness, and marking as well. And then the athleticism, so speed, agility, endurance, and strength. And as I said, we're going to give these guys just a 3-2-1 marker. So 3 obviously being the best and then 1 being the worst. But I don't want to focus too much on the overall points here. I think it's just kind of good to understand where their strengths lie. And then sort of you can appropriate, having watched them play a little bit as well, you can sort of appropriate what you think they can work on, what's workable at AFL level, and sort of how likely they are to fit into a role and sort of excel when they do get to the top level. Okay, so that's a pretty big intro there. We're going to kick into it with the transition mids first up. And the number one guy, probably the overall fancy to go as the number one pick, is Willem Dersma, 191 centimeter utility type, but he has really thrived as an inside-outside type midfielder. I think his real point of difference as a midfielder is the aerial game, and that is something that is becoming more and more, I guess, popular and a bigger deal for midfielders to have. If you do have a weapon in the air, you can be a threat in the forward half of the ground. You can create sort of difficult matchups for the opposition. You can sort of test them over the ground. And when you have an athletic profile like Willem Dersma, it's pretty scary. So going through decision making, I've kind of gone back and forth with this over my head. People have talked about Dersma being a poor kick. I don't think technically he is a bad kick. I think at times he's probably a little bit too aggressive with ball in hand. And that sort of leans more into decision making for me. So I've kind of marked him down here. I've just gone with a 2 for decision making. I think he still does bite off and execute some of those really strong kicks through the corridor when he's coming out of defense and those sorts of things. I think he's pretty safe with ball in hand, but can obviously turn the ball over at times. So I've just given him a 2 there. A 3 for competitiveness. And particularly here, I think back to that game against Vic Metro where he really sort of stood up in the big moments. Vic Metro had a late charge in that game. Dersma comes through, kicks a big goal. He just really, in that game particularly, he sort of willed himself into the contest, I feel. So I think he's been really strong in that area, particularly for Gippsland as well, where he's had some big games. He captains them as well. So his leadership's really strong. I've given him a 3 there. Craft-wise, I think he still definitely has a bit of a way to go with using his body, particularly at stoppages. But when you look at his transition work, I think he's really always running to good areas. He's very biased towards the corridor on offense. So he's an option there. He's that marking target, like I said. So I think overall his sort of outside craft is pretty good. It's probably just the body work and stuff like that he does need to improve a little bit. His kicking is excellent. I've given him a 3 there for the technical ability. As I said, decision making is a different conversation. Handballing a 2, hands 2. I think he's pretty strong in that area. And when you add in the speed at which he can hit the ball at his size and he can get down, he's got that real slick ground ball work. So I think overall his hands are really, really strong without giving him the absolute maximum of probably those top end sort of inside stoppage players. But marking is a real strength. And I mentioned that before, a point of difference for him to be able to push forward and create headaches for the opposition. So a 3 there. And he showed that through the national champs too. He took big contested marks consistently. And the athletic profile is really strong as well. So a speed, I've given him a 3. He's a smooth mover in general. Like he glides across the field, gets away from his opponents. His agility is really good. I've given him a 2 there. Endurance a 3 and strength a 2. So the strength and bodywork thing is probably something that if he wanted to become an A-grade midfielder, I think he probably does need to work on that. But there's enough there And we've seen enough, if you compare him to his peers here, that I think as an inside midfielder, he has done really well. He's performed really well. And then you add in the upside and the athleticism that he has, I think he can go to the next level. So all in all, he ends up with a 30 out of 36 here. Very, very strong, and probably sits here as the top transition mid. I think he's going to go, ultimately at pick 1 or pick 2 in the draft. Jevon Philippou is one of the most exciting players in this draft pool, if not the most exciting. He's sort of come with a bang towards this back half of the year. No championships for Jevon, which makes some of these parts of the aspects of the matrix really difficult to judge with him. I'll go through. I mean, ultimately, I think he's a really high-end transition type midfielder, but he has that sort of forward mid type prospect as well. He's a multi-sport athlete, someone that's come from a decathlon background, which really sort of, helps his football as far as from a projecting what he can do at the top level. That extra bit of athleticism that he has sets him apart from other players in this crop. So decision making and this front half with the IQ and mental is really difficult to judge with Jevon because he hasn't played in those big games like some of the other players. We haven't been able to watch him as closely in that kind of elite environment of, say, the national championship. So I've given him a 2 for decision making. I think this is, again, if I look at Jevon, I think athleticism and I think technical ability. Sometimes I think he can get a little bit too cute and a little bit too creative with ball in hand, particularly at under 18 South Australian level. He does take the piss a little bit. And sometimes you could say, is that too much confidence? Is it overconfidence, or is it a good thing? And when he, steps into the AFL, he's going to have that belief in himself that he can kind of pull off difficult kicks and stuff like that. There are some moments where he does get caught on the ball, just tries to turn players inside out, and I think does a little bit too much himself, which is why I've given him, like, overall for leadership, I've given him a 1, which probably feels a little bit unfair. But I just haven't sort of seen it from him across these, IQ and mental parts of the game. So competitiveness, I've given him a 2. It's just sort of like little decision-making things and probably, again, that sort of overconfidence that you see sometimes with Jevon of why I've marked him down. His craft there, I think from a transition point of view, he's really like consistently turning up. I think his athleticism allows him to do that. He's still got a long way to go, I think, with the stoppage craft of the game. And sometimes that leans into sort of cleanliness when he's under pressure in close in the trenches. But definitely something I think he can work on. His kicking, I've given him a 3. He kicks beautifully off both sides of his body and can really execute those difficult kicks. So I think when he pulls everything together with the decision-making and the mental, I think that's going to really click and it's going to be amazing for him as a really sort of like a strike midfielder type. Handballing, I've given him a 2. His hands, I've given him a 2. I mentioned there sometime on the inside, I think he can sort of double take the ball a little bit. There's a couple of, and he's sort of allowed to do that at under 18 level. So I think that kind of plays into it as well. I think if we saw him at the national championships, we'd have a better idea of that. Marking, I've given him a 3. Similar to Willem Dersma, it's a real kind of point of difference for Jevon. His athleticism, his vertical jump allows him to take big hangers, float across. He can do that in the back half of the ground and when he pushes forward. And he kicks goals regularly, particularly across the under 18 championships. His athleticism, I've just given him a 3 for everything: speed, agility, endurance, and strength. He's performed really well in his decathlons from events like shot put and discus and those sorts of things, which require a lot of strength. He's been really good there. He steps in and out of traffic, and you see a few moves that he does in game where he's able to sort of, turn one way, go the other way, and really open up the field. And players just sort of run away from him. They don't know which way he's going to go because of that unpredictable movement. So he's a threat. He's a serious player in this draft. I've given him a 29 out of 36 across this matrix. And I think he's probably one of the most high upside players, if not the most high upside player. There's just that element of doubt because he didn't play in the national championships, but I do ultimately think he is going to go amongst this sort of top 5 in the 2025 draft. The next one we have is Sam Grill, Oakley Chargers. He's a smaller type midfielder, 182 centimeters. And again, he leans towards that athletic profile as most of these sort of outside, more transition type midfielders do. They have that speed. And I think the ultimate for Sam Grill, or what you can sort of predict him as at the AFL level, is that sort of really inside to outside mid, the one that's got fast feet and can spread really, really quickly and be a different sort of an option. So he fits within a mix, I think, within a midfield. If you've got some of those bigger bodied guys and you want to get some speed into the midfield, the fact that he can play across half back and sort of help you with ball movement from there is really important too, I think, in the the prospect that is Sam Grill. So we'll go through his markers here. For decision making, I have given him a 2. I still think, again, and it's probably a theme across this entire draft, I do think there is some sort of that juxtaposition between the disposal and the decision making, I think is really interesting with a lot of these players. I've given Grill a 2. I think there's a bit of a way to go. I do think that in a lot of the football that he's played at the top level, like at Metro and in the VFL recently, he does get sort of left in these vulnerable positions quite a lot because he's tearing off the back half of the ground. He gets those sort of, at times, like hospital handballs that he has to get himself out of difficult situations. I talked about it last year with Finn O'Sullivan, where he was able to receive the ball quite a lot on the fly, and his elite decision making and agility, he kind of got him out of traffic. So he was able to sort of step around players even when they were right at him, coming towards him quickly. Sam Grill probably still has a little bit more to work on as far as that. So that sometimes comes into ball handling and things like that. Is he absolutely clean enough? I've marked him for his hands a 2. I'll go across this properly, actually. So I've given him leadership 2. Probably haven't seen him, focus on much more than his own game, I think, at this stage. So I've just given him a 2 for that. His craft at stoppage and transition, I think, a 2 as well. It's not something that kind of stands out amongst his game. I think you see more of the speed and athleticism, and that's something he still needs to work on. Kicking, I have given him a 3. I think he's one of the better technical kicks amongst this draft crop. Handballing a 2 and hands 2. And as I mentioned, that sort of receiving the ball on the fly in vulnerable situations can lead to some sort of unclean ball handling. But I think most of the time when he's in the clinches, in its stoppages, he is pretty clean with the ball, and it allows him to be able to get out into space really, really quickly. And then he pushes forward and he's hit the scoreboard regularly as well. Marking it's not really something that Sam Grill does at all. So all of his marking is going to be on the outside, uncontested. So I've just given him a 1 there. And amongst all of these sort of transition type midfielders, he's probably one that is just that more traditional type, I suppose, in that he's sort of low 180s. He doesn't really have an aerial game to him. The athleticism, he really thrives. Speed, agility, and endurance, not so much from a strength side. And I think when you see that strength element come to his game when he gets into the AFL system, you're going to see more of an explosive Sam Grill, someone that can burst through those tackles. And if he works on the craft element to his game, which I just gave him a 2 for there, the craft around stoppage, if he becomes a really, really clean player on the inside, I think then you're talking about a serious A-grade midfielder. And that's something clubs are going to have to consider. If he can kind of work on those elements of his game over 2-3 years as he comes into the AFL, he's going to be a weapon. Jacob Farrow from Western Australia is next. And I think the best words to describe him are power and precision. He's someone that's played most of his football at halfback. Physiologically, he's a big unit, 189 centimeters, and he is a sort of thick set body. You're probably looking at players that he reminds me of: Ed Richards, Hayden Young, that Jordan Dawson sort of type of midfielder. And he's got that left foot kick that kind of goes into that as well. But he doesn't have that sort of electric speed to him. So in that sense, I think he's less of an Ed Richards and probably more of a Hayden Young type. And the movement isn't quite there of, say, somebody like a Richards as well. But we'll go through him. I've given him a 2 for decision making. I think that is a pretty good part of his game, particularly when he plays behind the ball. He's able to set up there, be a bit of a leader back there, and then use the ball really, really well. But across this IQ and mental part of the game, because we've seen there's been less exposure of him from a midfield sense, we probably haven't seen him put under that really, severe pressure that you get when you're in at stoppages and having to, create, get the ball from inside to out, those sorts of things. So pretty consistent 2s across all of this front half leadership and those sorts of things. Again, he's a Western Australian, so he's one that I haven't quite got to look at as much as some of the Victorian boys from a leadership point of view. Haven't seen him play live very much, just that one game against the Allies, I think it was, in the Champs. As far as his technical skills, I think they're really good. I've given him a 3 for kicking. Amongst these midfielders, he's probably the best kick of all of them. I said strength and precision off the top, and the precision is that kicking. He hits really long penetrative balls through the corridor. I see him as a player that could push forward eventually, take marks, and then kick big goals, be that sort of handball receive player as well inside that midfield mix. I've given him a 2 for handballing and a 2 for hands. And again, that probably just comes into an exposure thing. We haven't seen inside midfield Jacob Farrow play consistently. So it just hasn't been something that I've seen enough of. And when he was up against players like Dyson Sharp in the Champs, he wasn't able to win as much inside sort of stoppage ball as some of those other players. But marking is a big point of difference for him. So I've given him a 3 here. His intercept work is really good, how he reads the play, and then he can use that kicking as well. And it's a modest athletic profile. I think it's not that he's not athletic, but he doesn't have that sort of speed element to his game, like I mentioned. So I've given him a 2 for speed, a 2 for agility, 2 for endurance, which I'm a little bit hazy on with Jacob Farrow, and then a 3 for strength, which I think is kind of where his game is going to go. I think if he can sort of add a little bit more of a speed element to his game, become a little bit more powerful in its stoppages, he'll become a force. But he's definitely that player that can run through, receive the ball, create by foot, and just ultimately give your team a lot of territory and a lot of precision as well. So really important, really archetypically modern midfielder. I've left him with a 27 out of 36 because I do think there is still an element of sort of doubt because we haven't seen him play consistently in that role, I suppose. So there is a bit of like, there's going to have to be a transition period when he gets into AFL where he sort of becomes a midfielder like Hayden Young did, like Ed Richards. But I think the signs are there that he can do it. We move on next to those first possession stoppage type players. So we've got Oliver Greaves first. He is that bigger bodied, like he's 191 centimeters in height. So he's got that reach in its stoppage, but he's also got that thick body, that really heavy set player that can take a lot of force, can take a lot of tackling pressure, stand up, free his arms, and then create for other players with his hands. So I think, archetypically, I think you're looking at that player, like I said, Patrick Cripps, Tom Green, that sort of player is Ollie Greaves at the next level. And there are less and less of those players, I think, within midfield mixes at the moment. And the more we sort of move away from this heavy stoppage game, and there's rumors that the last touch rule is going to come in 2026. I think that plays into even a move away even more from these sorts of players. The AFL wants the ball in motion continuously, and it plays into these transition types. So Greaves, I've given him a 2 for decision making. Probably me just being a little bit conservative there. I think his decision making is really good, and particularly his craft, which I've given him a 3 for if you look across there. His stoppage craft is really, really good. The way that he uses his body, gets into front position consistently. And that led him to be the leading disposal winner for Vic Metro across the carnival. He was probably the most consistent player. And as I've said, this sort of first possession player, they tend to be the guys at this level that get most of the numbers and can sort of consistently get their hands on the ball if they have a good enough sort of endurance profile and work ethic to be able to get from contest to contest. Competitiveness, I've given him a 3. He was Vic Metro's best player across the champ, so I think you got to give that to him. Leadership being a 2 there as well. So he's really strong in this sort of IQ and mental part of the game, I think we've seen. Kicking, I've given him a 2. I think technically he's not the absolute best kick amongst this crop, but for this type of player, I think his kicking probably is above average. His handballing, I have given him a 2. His hands overall, I have given him a 3. I think most of that goes into, I think he's more of a strength and clean hands type player than necessarily the most creative type handballer. I think he sort of plays within his means there with his disposal and just sort of makes the right decisions consistently. Marking, I've given him a 2. I think for his size and physiology, I think he probably isn't necessarily the best contested mark, and he doesn't have that athleticism to be able to jump at the football. But if you do plant him there, he is a bit of a force to be able to move out of position, and he can take some big marks as well. Speed, I've given him a 2. Agility, I've given him a 2. And endurance, I've given him a 2. And then strength, I have given him a 3. So overall, it's not the strongest athletic profile, but I don't think these players necessarily are athletic types, really. They're more of that kind of stand and deliver player. I think what a player like Oliver Greaves and Dyson Sharp's going to be in this group as well, but if they can add a little bit more of a speed element to their game like Tom Green has, that's where they can really go to the next level because their first possession stuff and their hands are so good. Dyson Sharp is next, and he's probably been one of the more controversial players in this 2025 draft pool. Some people rate him really, really high, and I think that's fair on the performances that you've got out of him from national championships, but I do still think there is an element where this type of player thrives, and I mentioned it with Greaves. He was the best player for Vic Metro. You look back to last year and those sort of more inside types, first possession types, mids, they're sort of the ones that thrive at this level particularly. But one thing you have to say about Dyson Sharp, I think you're not taking any risks with him. I think his competitiveness and his leadership sort of show that you're bringing in whatever team he goes into. I think he's going to do pretty well. I think he's someone that doesn't need others to sort of make him better or bring him into the game. He's going to do that through his elite mentality himself. So decision-making, I have given him a 2. I think as far as the decisions that he makes are sort of, well within his means, and he kind of plays within the skill set that he has, which isn't, he's not the most technical player, but he does certain things really, really well. Competitiveness, I've given him a 3. Leadership, I've given him a 3. And his craft at stoppage is second to none within this draft crop. The way that he can use his body, get the front position, and then get other players into the game. And I think that's that sort of team first mentality that really made South Australia win the national champs. And I think a big part of that was down to the performances of Dyson Sharp. There are things within, I think, the way that he played at champs that aren't necessarily going to cross over to the AFL. I think some of the ball use by foot isn't necessarily suited to the AFL, and it can be more easily intercepted at that level. But I think overall, the way that you see him adapt and play to his means at different levels, I think you can see him, having a really, really long. I think he's one of the more high floor players within this draft crop. Kicking, I've just given him a 1, not a strength at all, and I think he may even have to sort of hone back at AFL level and be an even higher sort of handball player. I think in the champs, he was a bit more of an outside sort of ball mover as well for South Australia, but probably at AFL level, I don't see him being that. For handballing, I have given him a 3. He's able to create really well and bring others into the game. Hands, I've given him a 3. And marking, similar to Greaves, I've given him a 2. He's more of that stand and deliver strong marker and good technique, but not necessarily someone that can run and jump at the ball and like a Dersma, for example, or a Jevon Philippou, somebody like that. Speed, I have given him a 1. Agility, I've given him a 2. And endurance, a 2. And strength, a 3. So clearly, again, similar to Greaves, it's not a well-rounded athletic profile, but I think if they can, speed over the first few steps is something that you can work on as you go into the AFL and you become a more sort of explosive athlete. I think if Dyson Sharp can kind of add that to his game a little bit, it will kind of, will turn him into one of the elite first possession players in the competition. And there are very few of these players in the AFL, but if you do it really, really well, which we've seen Dyson Sharp do, he still can be one of the better players in the competition. I look at, what Matty Rao's doing, Caleb Sarong. They're probably not a top 10 player in the competition, but at what they do, they're still really, really important. And the leadership that they bring is important. And I can see Dyson Sharp, going to a struggling club like the West Coast Eagles and being able to elevate a side like that. The next grouping of players is that sort of, as I mentioned, a forward mid hybrid type, someone that can, pretty contest dominant, but can also get the ball on the outside when needed and push forward and hit the scoreboard and win those forward 50 contests. So the first one, and I think the most dominant of this type, is Sam Cumming. I think he really does project as that, potentially like an Isaac Heaney sort of type of player who has spent a lot of his career in the forward line. He's 185 centimeters. And definitely when you think of strength and power and speed and athleticism, I think Sam Cumming is brimming with that. So decision making, I've given him a 2. At times, I think there's a little bit of a sort of crash and bash, helter skelter to Sam Cumming, which I think he can sort of tidy up and become a little bit more composed on the ball. Competitiveness is never lacking with Sam Cumming. He goes 110% consistently. So I've given him a 3 there. I just love the way that he goes about it and sort of, consistently impacts. Leadership, I have given him a 2. His craft, I think, again, and that probably comes into that composure and sort of decision making. I've given him a 2 there. He can probably still improve that a little bit. But definitely a team first player. And it kind of goes into that national championships with Dyson Sharp as well. Someone that can bring other players into the game consistently and just sort of stood up when it mattered. So I think overall for the mental, it's pretty strong for Sam Cumming. Kicking, I've given him a 2. I don't think he's the most precise kick, but he does have that penetration, which comes from his athletic profile, I feel. So he also can kick, technically on both sides of the body. So when he does come out of stoppage, I think he's really open to be able to get the disposal off quickly, which really helps him. Handballing, I've given him a 2. His hands are really, really good in at the contest as well. I think that's a real strength for him at 3. And his marking is the point of difference, the big point of difference. He can push forward. And it's different to, say, Philippou and Dersma, who sort of, they glide across and it's really, really fluid movement. I think with Sam Cumming, it's a little bit more brute strength, brute force, and he comes through and can really shift people off the ball. Speed, I've given him a 3. He has that explosivity to him. He can burst away from stoppage and does become that sort of prototypical modern midfielder, like I said, with Isaac Heaney. Agility, I've given him a 3 as well. He's a real serious electric mover laterally. His endurance is probably the thing in this athletic profile that isn't as well rounded about him. And I think that's probably where his game has to go to be able to receive a little bit more easy ball on the outside. I think definitely endurance is something that you can work on when you get to the AFL level when you've had multiple preseasons. So I think that's something he will work on, and I'd rather him have the speed than the endurance. But at the moment, it's kind of all contest. It's all crash and bash with Sam Cumming. So that's something he needs. And then strength, I've given him a 3, which leaves him on 29 out of 36 and amongst the top players sort of attributally in this draft crop. I think, again, with Sam Cumming, it comes into that conversation of what you actually think that he's going to be at AFL level. Is he going to be this sort of lower possession, high impact type player in the forward half of the ground? Or can you see him going to that sort of Isaac Heaney, Christian Petrarca, probably more midfield than forward type? And the last player here, player number 8, is Noah Hibbins-Hargraves. What an enigma he is. So interesting. He's been as low for me as probably in the 20s and then up as high as the top 10 at different times. I'm coming back towards him. I think there's so much to talk about with Noah Hibbins-Hargraves. I don't want to get too bogged down here. 186 centimetre, mid forward. So I've kind of got him in this forward half type player. He's a different type to Sam Cumming though. Probably more of a Harry Sheezel and what you've seen Harry Sheezel do in 2025, where it's been that sort of a little bit of centre bounce time. You push forward, you use your aerial game, you use your sort of creativity and your nous in the forward 50 to be able to kick goals, but it's not with that brute strength of someone like a Sam Cumming. At the moment, he's a utility, but he's one of the most technical he is the most technical player in this draft crop. And what I mean by that is his skill level at kicking, at handballing, decision-making, those sorts of things are really, really high level with Hibbins-Hargraves. It's kind of more just like, what position does he play? What does he do at AFL level? So I've given him a 3 for decision-making. His competitiveness, I've given him a 2, and his leadership, I've given him a 2. And that mostly revolves around consistency throughout the season. I do just see him as a guy that can float through games a little bit and not be able to impact at different times, albeit there's a clutch factor to him as well that we saw in the game against WA. He played at the weekend for the Stingrays, some of the footage that you can see here, and 5 goals, 29 disposals. Like, that's a ridiculous performance at that level. Craft, I've given him a 3 as well. I think he uses his body really well. He's really, really, really clean. And whether he's creating for other players or being the guy that's on the end of it and sort of being the player that's playing that killer pass, he has such a well-rounded game to him, but it mostly revolves around this technical element to his game. So kicking a 3, handballing a 3, his hands, I've given him a 3, and his marking as well. So the size of him, and I think it's more technique than it is necessarily athleticism with the way that he can mark the football, but he's a really clean marker. I think his athleticism is good, and that's why I've given him sort of 2, 2, 2, and 1 for strength. I think that's probably the weakest part of his athletic profile. He's not a Jevon Philippou and a Willem Dersma athletically, but I think he's quite good. He moves well and he moves intelligently, and that's where it comes back to the sort of IQ level to his game. Again, I just think if you're comparing him to someone like a Harry Sheezel, I think Harry Sheezel probably had a more consistent output across his entire season, which makes Noah Hibbins-Hargraves a little bit more enigmatic overall. But I think you have to value the technical ability, the way that he's doing that over so much better than everybody else in this draft crop, and probably players that have come into the AFL and hit the ground running in recent years, like a Harry Sheezel, who is very technical, like a Murphy Reid, who is a very technical kind of player as well, and a very high IQ player. I think you could probably predict that he is going to be someone that comes in and has an impact early. I do think, though, he would be more suited going to a club that's not on its knees, if that makes sense. I think you probably want to bring him into someone that needs a bit of a cherry on top and needs that class and composure. And Noah Hibbins-Hargraves is going to do that, and he's going to have those big clutch moments that you really, really need. Overall, he gets a 29 out of 36 and clearly ranks really, really high within the matrix. So what I'm going to do here, I've got the numbers up on screen of what everybody sort of rated attributally, but I think when you look at those transition mids, if you're breaking them down into a group, I've gone with Willem Dersma. If I had a gun to my head, if I had the draft pick, I would take him as the number 1 transition mid, Jevon Philippou as the second. Then I would go with Sam Grill and Jacob Farrow in 4th. And again, I think that just comes down to risk assessment in a way, in that we've probably seen Sam Grill play a little bit more midfield time than we have Jacob Farrow. And probably at a higher level, given that Grill played a little bit more midfield time at Champs and with the Oakley Chargers as well. Those stoppage mids, I think the way that I would be doing it would be Dyson Sharp as my number 1 stoppage mid and Oliver Greaves as my number 2 stoppage mid. I've definitely moved in that regard over time as the season's gone on. And the biggest thing there, it's not technical ability or athleticism or anything like that. It's just Dyson Sharp's competitive edge, I think that brings him here. I think you're bringing in a leader. And if you're amongst those bottom of the ladder type clubs like Richmond and not that I think Richmond are going to pick him because I think they already have that type of player in a Josh Smiley, but West Coast Eagles definitely would be fishing around him. Even an Essendon, I think on some level, or a St Kilda could use a player like Dyson Sharp to complement what they already have. So I'd go Sharp to Greaves. And then in the forward half players, I would go, at the moment, Sam Cumming number 1, and then Noah Hibbins-Hargraves. But I think Hibbins-Hargraves is a serious watch in this back half of the season. And again, if you were a club that has a top 10 pick, but you probably think you can bounce pretty quickly and get back up to the top of the ladder, I think you'd be seriously looking at Noah Hibbins-Hargraves. This is how they add up sort of attributally with the score overall. So you've got Dursma, Philippou, Cumming, Grill, Dyson Sharp, Oliver Greaves, Jacob Farrow, and Noah Hibbins-Hargraves. So I don't think you would necessarily select these players purely based on this matrix. And I don't think clubs do that. I don't think you're ever going to put a matrix together, but it's just a bit of a guide to kind of see how they stack up across those different elements. Like I mentioned, sort of the mental side of the game, the technical side of the game, and their athleticism. And you can just sort of see how many different things they are good at, I think, overall doing it that way. So it does just kind of help to go into the overall picture. But then you need to look at performance on the field as well. You need to, take a lot of different data points in is probably what I'm trying to say there. So I think that is a wrap for this video. That is sort of everything we've done there. They are, for me, the 8 best open pool mids at the moment, or players that at least project to be midfielders in the long term. So they'll definitely be up there at the end of the season. I'll bring out another sort of mock and another rankings, in the next few weeks. I want to really hit this draft stuff hard. I've had a bit of a hiatus from this content, had some personal projects and stuff like that. So we'll get stuck in the back end. We're going to be streaming the draft as well on the True Footy YouTube channel. That is a wrap for this video, guys. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, or subscribe to the channel, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.